Hey Peter, welcome to the Fabled Academy.
Hey, thank you for having me, man.
Will Kano be living legend in this year?
I would say that he probably is going to be a living legend this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a bummer, right?
It is definitely a bummer. It's the old reliable coming in in times of need, but I guess he's going to go probably this year, most likely.
It's your nightmare, but maybe it's the dream for every new player in Flesh and
It's
Blood.
it's definitely the dream for so many players. It's like the amount of people I've definitely met that are like, I hope this character LL's faster is way more than the amount of people that I meet that are like, oh, dude, I also love playing Kano. It's like probably like 3 to 1 of people like wanting the deck to leave than the people that are actually playing the deck. So it is pretty fun. It is pretty funny, I would say.
Yeah, before we jump deeper into this main topic, I actually want to welcome all the viewers to this episode of the Fabled Academy podcast, which is the 14th episode. My name is Alex, I'm your host, and with me today is Peter Buddensiek. Thank you so much for taking the time. With the main pod actually starting now, I want to ask you why is actually playing Kano today such an amazing experience in Flesh and Blood?
He the Kano is super fun. I think the wizard class in general does something that the main like the classes of Fab don't really hit on too much. Um, he is kind of an anomaly in the game. A lot of the because of the split damage with like other heroes like Runeblade, for example, like you get a little bit of a taste of it. But a lot of the wizards are way more all in on the arcane damage, which requires, sideboard slots from your opponent, and careful deck building from them and having actual strategies into these like a little bit more weird, but weird strategies that you would see than, the traditional like attack and block guardian like and warrior stuff. I think he's like I think Wizard's super cool to play because you hit on being able to play on your opponent's turn, which very, very few classes in this game actually do that. Wizard being like obviously the main one, but Illusionist as well is pretty much one of the only classes in the game that are allowed to play on your opponent's turn that you want to play on your opponent's turn, right? Like there's other that they can play, instance on your opponent's turn, but it's like kind of like a one off in your deck, like Channel Lightning value with like a burn up shock or something with from Aurora, but like Kano specifically does want to play on your opponent's turn at least 1 to 2 times every single game, every single match. So it's like it is very different than a lot of the other decks in the meta.
And you specifically, I remember we did an episode a few years ago. You were all in love with Kano basically the whole time playing Flesh and Blood, and that love didn't sink to the bottom, but actually rose, I think, because I remember a very special moment actually in Flesh and Blood history that you have cemented yourself in, and that is playing Living Legend with Kano not being living legend yet, but every every hero is legal in a living legend, and then basically playing him in full force. So that is an experience that like not many players have, and maybe you can talk us through that unique experience you had.
Yeah, I think that was I have to see the total of like the meta, but I think there was only like 2 or 3 Kanos like in the room that day, like at the Battle Hardened in Osaka to play Living Legends. So like realistically, and I don't know like what their lists were and stuff like that, but that tournament was super unique. It was the one before like Open the Floodgates was banned in LL or like restricted to one copy. Um, and basically being able to play 15 tomes was like the most crazy like experience that I ever had, probably in this game because of just like the actual percentage of like never missing in the deck because of it. And I can get into that a little bit as well, but uh like the little backstory of it is, you know the two main tomes that Kano played in CC got, banned, obviously, the Tome of Aetherwind and the Tome of Fiendel. And so a lot of your like inevitability of Kano and CC kind of left because you can't like pitch deck like you used to, and you can get bailed out a lot of in situations or do a lot of like the cool like Arsenal Yellow Tome type of like plays that you could do anymore. But they op- because of Rosetta coming out, they printed Open the Floodgates, which is Surge draw 2 cards, which initially looking at it, you just think it's like, oh, it's just okay. Everybody was like kind of distraught because of the tone bans before, but there's some people that were talking to me about the floodgates, Alex Four and Caleb Van Patten or Majin Bay we're basically talking about like this different version of Kano and CC, but it wasn't really too good and didn't really catch on. But the more we game to the World Championship, we were thinking about LL, and we were like, wait, but you can still play the old 6 tomes, but you get 9 new tomes, so you're playing 15. What if we just played this incredible, like, 3 Deja Vu potion, 3 Epot, like, play every single tome you can, and just trying to have, like, the biggest wildfire turn you basically could. And, basically, like, a couple days, like, literally the day or the day before, we finally put it together, like, in Osaka. Like, we didn't have the deck built before. Like, I was literally putting cards together on the table. And I goldfished one game, like, after we were testing Aurora versus Dio, like, right before Worlds. I think I lost, like, 4 games to 0 as, like, I was playing the Aurora side versus Dio. It was just a cursed matchup. And I was like, oh, I should work on this Kano deck for, LL on, like, Sunday, like, just cuz. And we're playing, and I, like, goldfish by myself, and I just do, like, 3,000 damage. Just, like, goldfishing. And I just have, like, I drew like 20 cards in the same turn, and we all look at each other, and like, I can send you the screenshot after so you can put it on the screen, but we all looked at each other and we were like, this deck is broken. And no, it was one of the best experiences of my life, like watching people like watching me play the deck. Like, I killed somebody on turn 1 of the game. Like, I was on turn 0, just like arsenal the wildfire and like played a potion, and then I like drew up, and then they attacked me with Spinal Crush as a Starvo opponent. And they died. And I drew 12 cards that turn, and they died. Like, just like this, you just do some crazy stuff with that deck, and it was one of the only experiences that, personally, I was able to play that not a lot of other people had the chance of playing at a level event.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, telling the beauty of Kano, because, as you said in the beginning of talking about the Battle Hardened, Kano has evolved in some kind of way, even though he has always been that I burn you down on your own turn hero. He had like different strategies throughout the years, the last 5 years of Flesh and Blood. And you are one of the players who have tested and experienced like all of the different sides of him. So you are also a very good person to like learn from how to play Kano, but also like how it is to actually face him and then wanting to counter him. So what would you really say is like the challenge that new players specifically have when going deep into Flesh and Blood and then suddenly facing Kano?
Yeah, I think the Kano curveball kind of hits people in like different times of like their early like Fab career, basically. I would say a lot of the time, specifically for Kano, um, a lot of new players, when you like, and this happens a lot, they either overblock or underblock a lot when they're like naturally playing the game, and they kind of like, from whatever side they're on, they kind of like tend to start doing the other side, or like gravitate towards decks that enhance that playstyle and then trying to work on it throughout time. So like a lot of the times when I see new players locally that are blocking a lot, I usually try to get them to play like a guardian or like a warrior or like something like that of kind of a playstyle. Versus if they don't like blocking at all, I try to put them on like Syndra or like more of a Runeblade Aurora type of stuff, right? To use their hands. But eventually you get to a point to where you play against Kano, but if you're still learning the traditional way how to play the game of like when to block, when not to block, when Kano comes, it's also just like way more taxing of knowing like when you're supposed to A/B things and when you're supposed to not, or when you're supposed to send cards in your own turn and like know that you can't die, versus like if you send a card you will die if you expose the last card in your hand, which is just like another curveball that they have to learn getting. Especially if you don't have like a Kano player locally or like in your area for like Procus at all. Remember, like this is post like Pro Tour 1 was like the big one where a lot of people, if you go back and watch the VODs, like There's people on camera playing against like Sasha that has zero AB because they didn't know Kano had arcane damage. Like there's literally a Starvo on camera that's like 7-1 at the Pro Tour that didn't know that Kano did AB and brought AB 0. And like this is that's obviously an anomaly of like way back in the day to where like everybody was new, everything was like that. But it's like you can think about it like new players go through that every time they play against these wizards of like, oh, I didn't know you could Storm Shatters kill me on my own turn. Like I expected you to like, play a spell in your own turn, like respond with Storm Shatters and do like your own turn thing, and then now I'm dead. Like, and it's just like super interesting. And sometimes it feels bad, but like if the person that is playing Kano is trying to teach the opponent, then it's usually not that bad. But it is really interesting at the beginning when you have to play against Kano.
I also think you can really get into like these situations where you think you have won. I had an experience like that the first time I met Kano. I was on 5 in a pro quest and my opponent was down to 2. And I was like, yeah, I have 2 attacks left in my hand. Of course, I'm winning. And I'm sending the attack. And then exactly that happens what you just described. And I was dead. And that is just an experience you don't really have with other heroes in Flesh and Blood. And as we talked about in the beginning, like we may see Kano leaving Classic Constructed, maybe even in this year, and then the environment will change. But until that happens, players really need to know how to interact with Kano and know his games that he wants to play, because that's the only thing that you can have in your arsenal when wanting to beat him. So what are really, would you say, like things that new players need to have when playing against Kano? You touched on AB, for example, and preventing damage. What kind of cards are that for all the new players listening?
Yeah, usually at this time in Flesh and Blood, they've printed a lot of like AB equipment that are also like class specific. Something like Brute has like the AB2 helmet, like Runeblade has the AB2 chest, and so it makes it a little bit easier to like have AB3 but not give up like a significant portion of your like equipment layout. A lot of the times before, like way back in the day, when you had to play like just arcane, like arcane barrier, and then you would just like take a lot of your main strategies away from your equipment suite, which was like not, which was like a big tax. But now like they at least get EB2 piece and then an EB1 piece, so you can have EB3 a lot sooner. But specifically for assassins, which is the most annoying thing that got printed probably in the last like couple years, is the AB1 Spell Void 1 equipment that assassins can run. If you're at like if a new player is playing assassin, you can get these. It's like I believe it's the Black Widow equipment, but I'm forgetting. It's from Rosetta, the expansion slot in Rosetta. But as AB1 Spell Void 1, but specifically with that, you can AB a spell and spell void it at the same, like with the same piece, because of how the layers work of when you can prevent something and when spell void happens. So you can technically stop 6 on a wildfire, which is super super annoying. But basically stuff like that. Also, Oasis was like one of the old like really really good spells against Kano. Helped because it was like more of like a meta card back then, to where like people wanted to pitch and like pay the 1 to do other things. Now Oasis not like the most played card, so it is a very big cost. But preventive effects like that, a lot of people play Shelter from the Storm these days, which is a very very good card against like assassin like ninjas right now, but also uniquely is good against Kano if you draw it on specifically the combo turn, to where your opponent's going off a wildfire and you can discard Shelter and then prevent 1 for the next 3 spells, which is preventing upwards of like 8+ damage, which is very very good specifically. So those are just a couple of the cards that you can play, but mainly just playing 3 AB is going to get you a lot farther than you would think.
And then also, when talking about this challenge of having Kano in the meta for players these days in Flesh and Blood, I know when starting the game, you were already touching on like learning how to block, how to attack, which cards to keep, which cards to give away. But there's also another layer of like experience that players need to have in the beginning, and that's called the fatigue playstyle in Flesh and Blood. And I think like Kano and fatigue decks, would you say those are on the same level of like complexity when learning Flesh and Blood, or is Kano like even more complex compared to like fatigue decks that are running in the meta?
Yeah, I usually think like Kano is harder to play than fatigue decks. I do think fatigue decks don't get a lot of like credit of like how hard they are to play. A lot of the time, it is more like knowing fatigue decks specifically need to know how to play their deck, but also play it fast enough of like knowing what your opponent is going to do and counter it. And you have to do it fast enough because you can only take up like 10 minutes of the 50-minute clock because your opponent's going to be a lot slower playing and trying to, and more meticulous, try to actually beat fatigue. So they're going to take like probably like 30, 40 minutes of the clock. So you have to be able to like play your deck at a way more fast of a rate and know when to block versus like non-fatigue decks. But Kano is more like knowing resource management and actually knowing when to go off instead of just going off whenever you can do it. Something that like I'll shut up. Like Majin is really good about. Is he wants he wants to be able to go off when it's like 99% going to win the right, and like there's a gauge of like what people are allowed to do. You know, like some games you can only go off when it's like maybe 60% to win and stuff like that. But trying to get the percentage points to get from like 60% to like 90% to win the game because you're going to combo is like what really differentiates how good of a wizard player you basically are. Which yeah.
So not only is it a challenge in how to counter Kano, but also a challenge in learning all of the like lines that you have in your deck and when to take them. What would you say are like the key cards that like Kano players should pick up in the beginning, and also why it's so inexpensive to play Kano when starting with Flesh and Blood?
Yeah, basically the cards to pick up obviously would be like Aether Wildfire, Blazing Aether, which is like core parts of the deck and like how the combo works. But I think basically Kano is like super inexpensive when you get like into it. The deck is like $30. Like if you take out like 4 cards. So it's like $30, and then like you have your big four basically, which is going to be like Tunic, Storm Shatters, which like if you have a Tunic from another deck, then that already hits one of them. But like Storm Shatters is a pretty expensive one. And then there are 2 Fables, which is going to be Eye of Ophidia and then Will. With recent like printing, Will is like not that expensive. It's like a Rainbow Foil is like $60. Just be careful with like how curled it can be in certain areas. So and like Cold Foil is like 100. But like Eye of Ophidia is like the big one, which is like obviously a $300 card. But if you don't have the money to play with like the Fableds, everything else, the deck really is like a $200 deck. Like after like $30 the base, you get the equipment and like maybe one of the 2 Fableds, and then you wait on Eye of Ophidia for a long time until you play the deck more. But it is pretty cheap to build at the very beginning. But does have some really good pimp options if you really want some nice EAs and foils.
Yeah, there's definitely a blink side to Kano as well for all the players who want to go for that. But I think like it's especially a good position where Kano lies, because not only is he that inexpensive to start with, but he is also very powerful at that cost, which not a lot of decks actually can do in Flesh and Blood. Starting from, like you said, $30 all the way up to $200. There are not really a lot of decks who can push for that much damage and that win condition that Kano has uniquely designed to him. But then also, when looking at the cost, Kano is coming back again and again over these last, over 5 years actually at this moment. And that also makes him like very interesting, because he can, basically pop out from nowhere, like you showed many times. And that's very unique to Kano as well. So when we are looking at like the environment that we are in at the moment, it's not only interesting to look at Kano, but also about the other wizards that are running around. And maybe you can draw a comparison between those because they might share or not share the same card pool.
Yeah, it's the wizards are pretty interesting. At the very beginning of like the wizard class, I always thought like Kano was, what all the other wizards are like trying to aspire to be, like they kind of base all the other wizards off of Kano. But recent sets and like reflection has kind of made it to where like Kano is actually the anomaly of like how design like the wizard class specifically. Because if you look at the other like three wizards that they've come out with, Icelander, Verdance, and Acilio, they play very differently than what Kano plays, right? Kano is basically trying to play in your opponent's turn, is like a full glass cannon, has 30 life, like no armor pieces at all, and just only plays, can only play the wizard pool. So it's like very glass cannony and like combo focused. But then when you look at Icelander, which had, the ice talent, which was always trying to slow your opponent down and play more of a long game, and Icelander fit that perfectly, and then used, the wizard class to be able to chip your opponent on their own turn and slow them down and eventually whittle them down what that ice wanted to do. Then there's now Verdance, which Verdance has gotten a lot of popularity recently, from like a couple different players. But Verdance basically also elongates the game out, but doesn't play in your opponent's turn basically at all, besides like maybe one time with Storm Shatters with like coming there, but doesn't really play in your opponent's turn at all. But still elongates the game like Icelander and gains a whole bunch of life and is more of a value deck than the others, right? It's more comparable to Icelander back in the day. Versus then Acilio is more like Glass Candy like Kano is, has a little bit more health, has a really good hero ability as well, but uses like the lightning talent to be able to play attacks and then play non-attacks at the end, right? So it's kind of like a Rune Blade kind of a thing to where I actually thought like Noah Bagelman had like a really good thing. He was talking about how like where to go after Viserai, and he said Acilio. And I didn't really think about it before, but if you look at it, like Viserai plays a non-attack and then an attack, but then Acilio plays attacks and then plays a non-attack. So you just flip them, and they're basically the same thing, which is really pretty interesting to see when I was listening to that podcast earlier. But yeah, Kano is kind of like the anomaly of all the wizards, and every other wizard wants to play attacks. But Kano doesn't want to play attacks because of his hero ability, basically.
Even though there's like one attack that sometimes come up in Kano lists, right?
Yeah, Nourishing Emptiness is like pretty much the only one that Kano plays like a lot of the time. Usually it's a sideboard card for like very specific matchups to where you're basically never really hitting your hero ability until like the final turn of the game, which is very late into the game, so you can always cast the card. And Nourishing allows you to draw 5 cards one time, which if you're playing Nourishing always is going to hit or is used as a popper versus Illusionist when the matchup's usually so bad anyways versus Illusionist that like anytime you could like kind of like cheese the victory through Nourishing, you're trying. So yeah.
So you're touching on a very important part here. That's like the kind of areas we had in the last years where Kano really wasn't that good of an option. Maybe you can talk about like the bad matchups and the meta specifically where you wouldn't recommend to play Kano at all.
Yeah, he's kind of come in and out of like being, popular and stuff. Like basically it started like before the first Pro Tour, he was like kind of like never played. Just like nobody really figured out what he could do with him. Before Everfest came out, like Wildfire didn't even exist. So like trying to play Kano was just like really, really hard. Like nobody was playing AB back then, but like the deck just didn't have enough like enough to like really finish the game in time when your opponent was, you got 30. After Pro Tour 1, when the, Ragamuffins Wildfire combo was like first introduced by the Arsenal Pass guys, then he became a little bit more of a mainstay competitor. But still at that time, like once people figured out how to play against the deck and all the videos started coming out, kind of went to the wayside for a very long time. Then came back a little bit with like the Lexi meta, like Lexi, Dromai, like Uldum, to where he was like randomly a good pick into those characters specifically. And then even when Uldum left and Icelander came back into the meta, he was also like uniquely good against Icelander, and sometimes you're running the correct sideboard guide and stuff like that, and if your Icelander was experienced or not in the matchup. So you had like that little time, and then he also went into the wayside again to where like he just wasn't that good. And then heavy hitters came out to where everybody's playing like a very fair game. Like we had the best aggro deck in the game was like a brute, which like was pretty inconsistent to draw discard a lot of cards, so he wouldn't have a lot of ABing cards in his hand. That was like Kano was uniquely good against, and then he was good against the Guardian deck, and he was good against the Warrior decks, obviously, in that meta. So he came back for that, and then he was also good for MST for that Pro Tour as well. But then after that Pro Tour, they did all the book bannings, and then he was again not good because he didn't have the inevitability anymore in Rosetta, and so he kind of didn't play anything in Rosetta. And then now, going into Hunted, he has come back again, and so it's very interesting with Kano to where like he's in the meta, like something happens and he just like goes to the wayside for a while, and then he comes back and then he goes away. He's very, very specific of like what he needs in a meta to succeed. But it is obviously very very fun to play when he has those limitations are coming off. So yeah.
Yeah. I think the question is then also for those Kano players who are not really able to leverage on his power in these specific times in the meta, what are the other options available? Because you talked about the other wizards that we have at the moment. Icelander is living legend already. We have Verdance and Osili at the moment. But I think what you mentioned was like these three heroes specifically don't really share a big part of their pool.
Yeah, no, they really don't. Verdance really uses like a lot of the Earth pool. Is kind of way more into that style of like using the attacks from the Earth side, like the Fellings, the Plow Unders, and a lot of those like Ring of Roses, like their new cards from the set, like Ring of Roses, like very, very card, and kind of leans into trying to be more of a a late game powerhouse after your ability is turned on. Which doesn't really share any of the cards besides like Scour with Kano basically. Then Acilio has some spells like Mind Warp or like etchings and stuff like that, but they're very specific to what his lightning cards do. But he's playing like 30-40 lightning cards in his deck, so it's the more talented wizards don't like tend to go way more into the talent than they do the actual wizard class, and like the wizard class is just kind of sprinkled around instead of the vice versa. So they don't share too much of the card pool together, besides just being naturally a wizard. But going into the talents is also very good, because if you fall in love with playing Acilio and you like the lightning-esque, you could always fall back into more lightning characters like Aurora or something like that.
Yeah, and I think Aurora specifically gets also an armory deck. And also is like on the baseline pretty cheap to build when you're starting out. So maybe running like Aurora and Kano is an option for new players out there who want to test like different strategies. But definitely when you are looking on your side here, like what are the heroes that you love to play in the times where Kano is not really a big option?
Yeah, I've always been like a ninja player. I really love playing ninja as well as like wizard. So like currently just like won my RTN with Syndra, which I really liked because I used to play a lot of like the first deck I ever played in Flesh and Blood was like Katsu back in the day. So played a lot of Katsu, went to like Chain, played some Rune Blades, like the Ninja Rune Blade like pipeline basically. Then like Fi came out, and then I was playing a lot of Fi leading up to the first World Championship. Obviously Fi was good for a very long time. Briar rotated, played Briar as well, and then got to the point to where didn't play a lot of them because they haven't been like super, super good. Zen came out, played a decent amount of Zen, but Kano was good at that time, so played a lot of Kano. And then now played a lot of Syndra, but I also played a lot of Aurora, which is basically kind of feels a lot like a Fi and Syndra kind of a deck, like Aurora as well. So I like playing those type of decks, specifically that are like more aggro all in, like the Kano playstyle. So I kind of stay towards that, but I think other people usually if they like the Kano aspect, also play Illusionist, which is our arch enemy, but it's fine in this situation. They play a lot of like Enigma, Prism, like Dromai, etc. Like I know a lot of Wizard players specifically play Illusionists as well because it has that type of feel to where you're doing like slightly inefficient things, but are very, if you're allowed to do it multiple times, they become hyper efficient and way more efficient than the normal playstyle. So it is very nice.
Yeah. Also, like you have a YouTube channel for yourself that is named Mask of Momentum, so you are like sentimenting that ninja vibes there as well.
Yeah.
I have to say, Mask of Momentum is my favorite card too, so we share something there. But definitely, you were bringing up Dromai, and I think Dromai is specifically a very interesting hero because she has the ability to play with a lot of her allies. And we didn't mention it yet, but you have an ally too. Maybe you can introduce your ally as well.
Oh yeah. So this is Bentley. He's a golden doodle. He's kind of hangs out. He's a little off camera. Like he's sleepy. He's a little sleepy right now, but we just went for a walk, so he's tired. But yeah, he's great. He's like a 80-pound golden doodle. Just this big fluffy puffball. He just got a cut because it's kind of hot in Vegas right now, so he got little bit of a trim. But usually he's just like this big, shaggy, like fluffy mess. So yeah, he's great. He's great. Usually he's just chill and just kind of lays down wherever. So yeah, he's nice.
Yeah, I love dogs as well, so I'm very happy to meet you both. I have a dog as well. He's not here in my room, but his
Oh.
name is Kodiak. He's an Australian Shepherd.
Mm.
He doesn't really play Flesh and Blood, but maybe one day he will.
Mine doesn't play Flesh and Blood either. He sometimes eats my cards, so maybe he's trying to play like, but yeah, he has started not trying to eat cards. But he loves sleeves now. At the very beginning,
Oh,
he used to take the card and he would like put it in his mouth, but it was just because like I would run after him and like he'd be like, "Ooh, we're playing," like I should take the card more. But like obviously, I didn't want any of the more expensive cards to be taken that way. So I put them up on a shelf so he couldn't take them. But sometimes, penny sleeve or like a sleeve will come there and he'll like run around with it. So that's his new obsession of trying to find, penny sleeves on the floor in the office or something like that. So yeah, but no, he also does not play. So, but he does he does like laying down right next to the chair whenever I'm playing, so it's nice.
yeah, that's nice too, for sure. I think like the also coming back to that ally aspect of Flesh
Yeah.
and Blood, it was a pretty new thing when Dromai was released. Of course, like Prism had her spectral shields and her way of playing auras, but specifically the dragons in Dromai were a very new technique back then. And when you're thinking about like Kano, not being available in Classic Constructed in the future, and him being the only like straight generic wizard that we have at the moment, what would you envision like a new wizard in the future to be? A new wizard maybe having like allies as well, a familiar that gives him spell power or something. What would you imagine a wizard to be?
Yeah, I haven't put like too much thought into what another wizard could like a just wizard could be. I think like the closest like hint of what could be is that Blaze currently is like obviously was a young promo and is doing pretty good in Blitz. From like the people that play Blitz, they say that she's pretty good in that format. I think they would probably update the hero text to do like kind of like a new Kasai type of thing, but I think Blaze is probably the closest we could be to like a new like just wizard hero to where they're going way more on like the op synergy and like manipulating the deck that way. And still being playing at instant speed with like the hero ability and stuff like that. But personally, I think something that would be cool kind of goes into a like a necromancer kind of area, which I know a lot of people are super hyped on because of like the high tides thing. Like, are we getting like a pirate illusionist, or are we getting like finally the necromancer, which like so many people have been talking about, like that class from the original lore book that hasn't been printed yet. Like I think no matter what, I think every single person that I've ever talked to was like, if they ever print a necromancer, like it's over. It's like I'm all in. That's gonna be like probably one of the most popular classes of all time. Just like if it's like very good and playable, like the deck seems like so cool. You do so much with it. But I think Wizard could definitely go into a place to where I've been watching like a lot of solo leveling, which is like a new hot anime right now. And the main character like summons a lot of things and like they fight for him. And there's like a mage in one of the episodes that summons like these fire things that go attack their like orc opponents. And I could definitely see like a new wizard being able to summon these things that do arcane damage for him, or as a preventative shield, or like, oh, like kind of like Arclight Sentinel, like you have to attack this first, but you can have go again into attacking me later, but you have to attack this first and it'll block for me, or it'll do, anytime I do arcane damage, it will also do one, it'll ping you for one, and stuff like that, or amp my thing for one. And I think that's definitely an area they can go. Every time they print allies, it's always like in an area to where like you, if they put like one thing too good on the ally, it's like super broken. But if they do it like, but if they're like too bad, they're like kind of unplayable. So it's like it's the ally stuff is like super hard, but they actually hit it like really on the stem with Dromai, to where like I felt like playing against Dromai that like a lot of the dragons were powerful, but they were fair versus, and like they weren't that bad coming on the back end of like trying to deal with them and then there. But yeah, the ally stuff is super cool. I wish they do it more, but I know it probably takes like 3 or 4 times the amount of like manpower and like testing to like make an ally than it does to make like any other class in the game. So
I think also even if we don't know what is coming yet, it's nice to speculate on it and
yeah,
make our minds up. But definitely coming back to Kano, it's very unique to him as well that he's not only pretty strong in Classic Constructed, but also you have the ability to push him towards Living Legend, which we talked about in the beginning. Would you say even that like Kano is a viable option in Living Legend these days as well, or is his power like gone after you played him in Osaka?
no, I definitely think he's still very good in the format. With new cards coming in and out of that format, I still think he's like super super good. Like I went to the calling that was in Chicago, that was LL, and basically, I walked into the room and there was like, like 200-300 people that were like basically telling me like, oh, are you playing Kano tomorrow? Are you playing Kano tomorrow? And I was just like, I mean, they banned all my tomes, like the floodgates thing. I can't really do the thing anymore, but every single person that I ended up not playing Kano for that event, specifically because I wanted to play Viscerai, because I've always loved playing Viscerai and I wanted to do like the cool skeleton thing. But everybody was like, man, I brought like 4 or 5 cards because I knew Kano was going to be good. Like, and then I eventually played it at the Battle Harden that was on the Sunday of the event, and I was playing Kano, and I was like, every single one of my opponents were like, oh, I didn't see any Kanos yesterday, so I was like, I'll take it out. And then you just like blow them up. And it's like, LL is like one of those formats to where everybody is doing something so powerful that not a lot of the time they can give up like an equipment slot or multiple cards in their main deck that would like very hinder their gameplay to like respect Kano. So he's always, I think he's more viable in LL than like he probably has been in CC for a very long time, of just being like, yeah, like I do think he's just a top 5 deck since LLs came out, basically, because of just there's so much you can do in that format that you have to come back to the realization where it's like, well, this hero is like very like still very good in CC, but he's even better in LL, and he only has like 2 cards that are banned. At one point, he was winning CC games, like Alex 4 at Pro Tour Amsterdam last year won like the LL Battle Hardened with his CC Kano deck was 0 cards changed. There was literally 0 cards that like you had to change at the time because all the tomes were legal, and this was before Flood. And he just played the same deck he played at the Pro Tour in the LL, and he won the LL like thing. Now you can't do that because they've banned a couple cards, but yeah, and there's even cards in LL that are restricted that aren't restricted in CC at this point, like open the floodgates. So I think he's quite an anomaly of like being very, very good in an older format, but also not being LL'd in the current format that we have right now. So yeah.
Yeah, he's somewhat of a black swan event and
Yeah.
can just happen and catch you off guard. And that's also like something that specifically resonates with players who want to find like that one deck in the meta that can counter actually what is being an S or A tier in the meta at the moment and not really on the radar of players that are pushing these decks. But then also like this unique style that you just described where he's like, funnily enough, very strong in Living Legend as well, where basically there are so many like overpowered decks that it's kind of funny to think about that a CC deck like crushed them.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think like obviously the 15 tome version is probably one of the best decks like of all time throughout history of Fab. Like the Verdance deck with like the Kraken's Aether Vein and then like the Kano deck with 15 tomes are probably some of the best. Like you can see how like a small thing from like balance could like make Wizards so good because they're just the class that like walks that tightrope of being like, I'm fair enough for this format or I'm overpowered and you have to board like 7 cards into. And like that Verdance deck was the same thing towards like watching that Verdance deck at that one Battle Hardened that they had, I was like, damn, this deck is messed up. And it felt the same way playing Kano at that Battle Hardened in Osaka. Unfortunately, it's the Battle Hardened at the World Championship, so like there's no coverage for it because they're streaming the top 8 of the World Championship. But yeah, it would have been really funny watching some of the games that I was playing that weekend with Kano. Just like your opponent sits down and it's just like I have 3, and I'm like, it does not matter in this format, man. Like it's like. He's like, do you want to watch me draw 10 cards again? Like that tournament specifically is going to definitely be an anomaly of all time, but it is a very fun time.
Yeah, it's something that in 5 years we will look back at and exactly what you described, think about it. I actually want to like know from you, like when players are looking to pick up Kano and you touched on the cards that needed to like build the core of the deck, but then also like what are the things that you are looking for when like playing out your hands? There are these like legendary lines that Kano wants to play and maybe you can like walk us just through in the theory here.
Yeah, so like obviously he wants like the main combo line, which is going to be like Wildfire, Lesson Lava, Blazing is like the most notable cards from him as well. But I would say something that is like they're not wizard cards, but they're very, very good and important for the deck is like actually Energy Potion and Potion of Deja Vu, which I touched on earlier, but they are specifically very like it allows you to extend your combo or do things that you wouldn't be allowed to do off just drawing a normal hand. Like Deja Vu like is really good with floodgates and like these tomes to be able to put them back on top to hit them off the top with Kano and like draw 2 cards later from the effect, or like making sure that you're going to draw blue off Ragavan's hat and like a lot of other things, or putting a red back on top that you drew in your hand that you want to play on your opponent's turn and that you're able to not blind flip as well. And then Energy Potion, getting resources in Kano. Kano is like one of the most resource intensive decks, right? Like it costs a whole card to use his like leader ability. You're not cheating resources like a lot of the other decks are going to be. Like Zen, you can transcend, get a resource off of your chest and pitch it, so you're like not really losing a card at all because you're getting a tutoring card. But Kano is like, you can pitch a card to your ability, look at the top card, and it be like just a random blue 0-for-1, and you're like, well, I just used an entire card that I could have blocked with to like deal 1 damage, and which is like really, really underrated, right? So he's very punishing. He needs like the traditional line needs 11 resources to do, like 10, 11 resources to just minimum do. So because it it needs double Kano activation, which is 6 resources. You have to pay 1 for Storm Shiners. You have to pay like 2 for Wildfire, and that's 9 resources, right? Like 9 resources right there. It's a 10th if you want to like Crucible. It's 11th if it's a Lesson of Lava, not a 1 cost. It's like a 12th if you want a Metacarpus node. Like literal 12 resources that like no other deck really has that much of a demand for the amount of resources than Kano does specifically. So I'd probably say like Epod is like super important. Pushing a Deja Vu is super important. And just knowing the lines of that. But Aether Spindle, being able to opt for like the amount of damage that you deal, which is usually 4 or 5 with the card. And basically stacking your deck of like, okay, well, I want to leave this red the 5th card, and I'm going to draw these 4 blues so I can banish the red card. And do a couple cool things like that. Really, really helps. And those are like the main cards that I'd invest my time into learning before anything else.
And maybe you can also talk about like the like power level that then cards like Eye of Ophidia bring into the mix.
Yeah, Ibophilia obviously is going to be like the most expensive piece of the deck. It's like currently $300 as we talk, but it's one of those cards that when you pitch, you get to opt to, which opting to in a lot of decks doesn't really do too much because they're not manipulating or using the top cards of their deck like every single turn. Sometimes like Azalea, like Sanskar Great Bow type of variants, will use Ibophilia very, very well. But Kano is like the unique one that does it the most, of where he will use every single card off the top on that turn, and opting to actually makes the entire draw curve out specifically. Like, if you opt to and then the top cards are blue and the next cards are red, you just switch them, then your damage output goes up by like 7 to 8 basically. And then knowing if you're going to, draw blue off of Ragamuffins when not going to, and just kind of filtering is way more efficient and way better in Kano than it is in any other deck. So Ibophilia obviously is not a needed card, but it is like once you get up there, like that card every time you pitch it gains you like 5% basically in a game, like every single time you see it. So yeah.
Then also we have that other fable called like Will of Arcana. It's not really as powerful, I think, as Eye of Ophidia you just described, but what is the power level of that card?
Yeah, the power level is very good. It also sandbags off of like the Deja Vu power level of like when you pitch it, you get to amp 1, which is doing an additional 1. Specifically, they've printed a lot of hate cards and a lot of spell void like equipment that like you can use regularly now. So just while firing for 6 sometimes is not good enough, right? For an amplifier for the rest of your turn. A lot of time you need to, multi-spell in the beginning, before like you're blazing anyways. But with Will of Arcana, amping the next damage that you deal helps all these surge cards also coming in. And it's very hard for like developers to basically like print a lot of these wizard cards, because if you just print it like 1 too good of a stat, like it's just like hyper efficient, right? Like Voltic Bolt like is a 2 for 5 when like every other attack in the game is a 2 for 6, right? But I can make it a 6 by using Crucible, which is now it's a 3 resource 6, right? Which everybody else's 3 resources attack for 7 or more, right? So you have the power level of the card has to go down because it's doing arcane damage, right? And it's hitting on another axis. But Will allows you to get that like depowering back a little bit because it does amp 1 every time you pitch it. So it's using these utility blues over and over again is like really good with these Fableds. And I've had a lot of times where you pitch Will to amp 1, you Deja Vu it back from the top, you Ragamuffins, you draw the card again, you pitch it again, and it's like now you're amping 2 on the first spell, which being able to give +2 to a spell and not pay for resources for it is extremely good. So yeah.
You also brought like a Potion of Deja Vu here in the mix, and maybe you can like on the baseline explain like when you have a Potion of Deja Vu on the board, like what are you looking to do with it?
Yeah, Potion of Deja Vu is way more of a like it helps even out the deck a lot, right? So Kano has a lot of thin margins of needing to draw blue off ragamuffins to be able to pay for everything. Um, knowing when to like blind flip basically like a spell off the top, if you can afford to do that or not. Also like the tomes and the open the floodgates are very, very good with Deja Vu because then you can just if you draw them, you can just immediately, pitch that card plus a blue, put it on top, know you're going to be able to draw at least one blue because of the Deja Vu potion. So it allows all these intricate combos. Also, if you use like Storm Shatters plus Ragmuffin's Hat to combo, and your opponent's still at like 11 or 12, if you play a potion on Deja Vu, it's actually like a mini combo. It's like another Ragamuffin's Hat to put like a card back on top, basically. So, it plays a lot of it has a lot of like hats basically to do stuff, and it really helps the deck out a lot. And playing, I used to not be the most uh happy playing Deja Vu. Like I was like only playing one for the longest time, and now I'm like, oh, three is just the number, like three is just like it is that good to play three of them decks. So yeah.
So when you're looking back at the years that you were playing Kano, like how many games do you think you have gotten in on Kano?
Oh man, it's been like 4 or 5 years at this point playing the character. If you're also equating like Blitz, like in it, because I've played a lot of like Blitz games with Kano.
Yeah.
Obviously got LO points before he left in that format as well. Um, it's been close to over 2,000 games, I would probably say, like over like a 5 year span. Like, yeah, definitely played a lot. You like even when I'm like not in the mindset of like wanting to like sit down and like really like test for like and get a lot of data for like other decks in the format, I'll just sit there and play Talishar with like Kano and just like have fun, like flip like definitely not take the correct line and just be like, oh, I just want to, I want to play off the top, like sometimes just be, like just have fun playing the game, like bring it to like this weekend I have like an RTN that's in it's out of town, but I'm already qualified because I won my local one last weekend, and I'm like, I should just play Kano, just have some fun, like if you hit off the top, you hit off the top, So I just enjoy playing the character, just being, always being able to bring it whenever it feels fit. So yeah.
How would you then describe, like, if we imagine Kano will be gone and you think back about the time and tell a friend, like, what was Kano for you?
Yeah. Yeah, explaining Kano to people that like either one like are just getting into the game of Flesh and Blood or don't play the game and being like, yeah, I play on my opponent's turn and like I just like combo them and they die is like not something that a lot of people can equate to like knowing they're like, oh, obviously that was broken. But like when you really break it down, like the deck does a very, very powerful thing, but he's not like overpowered. Like I've never thought in time, like besides like that one LL event, like playing CC and being like, wow, Kano is just, the best deck in this form. Like, and it's just like no other deck comes close to it. Like, and sometimes like combo decks kind of are like that in a lot of games to where like they have the impression of being like super, super, super powerful, but like in the metas that they were like just another playset. Like, thinking back to like Kano was obviously very good at Pro Tour One, but it didn't win. Chain won that event. Like Chain, Starvo, Prism were illegal at that time. Like, so I obviously have very, very, very fond memories, and it'll be very fun maybe in like 2 years, like a new player walks into the LGS, and I'm just like, dude, like you would have loved this character way back in the day. That's like doing like this 4 card combo when you're well, like maybe in the future we have another wizard or we have another class that is doing like you know multi-card combo to 36 your opponent on their turn or something like that. So it'll be really fun to see what they do in the future and if they ever try to make something like Kano again. So yeah.
I think like this future look on Flesh and Blood in general and bringing Kano into the context is also interesting with the new set that we have on the horizon, because at the moment we are in the hunted meta,
Yep.
but you already touched on it. We will have a pirate set for next, and you touched also on your hopes a little bit for that set. But what really makes like the next set so exciting for you, besides like the necromancer that might be in it?
Yeah, the next set is super cool. Like, obviously, I think it's been like a pretty big meme in the community of like pirates and Flesh and Blood for a long time. And I honestly never thought it was going to happen. Like, I was one of those people that were like, I saw all the theories come out, like so many people making videos about it, just being like, oh, look at this. This guy looks like a pirate in the background of the ship, like, and it's like, I'm like, all right, man. It's not like LSS is telling the artist to like put a ship in the background, There's probably, it's just like they're just thinking about it, right? And they just like think a boat could fit in the back, and then, uh, but it kept happening. Like there was one every other set basically for a couple years. Like cut through the facade is like a pirate cutting through like an illusion or like a skeletal ghost basically. And then obviously the most apparent one is from Hunted is like Shelter by the Storm, right? That's just like it literally just has pirates and a boat on it, and like everybody was like, no way, like they saw we saw that art and I was like, oh, we're never getting a pirate set. Like Trench is also just literally a pirate dude. And I was like, there's no way we're getting a pirate set. They're just gonna like tease us in the community for like it's gonna be this long running joke. And then I'm like playing like the Battle Hardened in Portland, and I'm like in the middle of a round, and the guy next to me is just like, yo, we're getting a pirate set. And I'm like, dude, no way. And like he's like, yo, watch this video. And like then it's so weird because like obviously this is like a big event, but like people are like in the middle of their game and this dude's just watching like the announcement video of like High Tides, and he's just replaying it, and more people like during their games are just like these like high level like battle hardened games are just like, yo, we got a pirate, let me watch this, like, yo, let's take a break real quick, like the game's almost over, there's like 20 minutes on the clock, we're all watching this like 13-second clip of like a pirate ship showing up, and we're like, no way they're actually doing it. Like that's like the type of stuff that like I really like about the community, that like everybody's just trying to have a good time and have a good laugh, and like these cool ideas, like people have been talking about like pirates for years, necromancers for years. Like obviously I don't know if like necromancer is going to be in the set, but like if there's a monastery set that like, and you know that's like necromancer is like the new lead of like the set, like I think there's a lot of concepts that people want to see, like bard, like alchemist, and stuff like that they've touched on in the very early days of like the lore book and stuff like that that we haven't gotten yet, that we're really, I think it's really fun. Like like people like those concepts with like the whole like D&D kind of concept things, and you really want to, it's really cool when it finally comes together, and then the community is like, pirates could be literally like, it could like be a new class like pirate, or it could be a talent, and I don't think anybody would be mad, and I think everybody would be super excited. Like it could be the worst deck in the game, and I would go to locals and there'd be like 4 people playing pirates. Like that's how much like the community just wants it to be a thing. If it's good or bad, they just want it to be a thing. Like it's one of those. It's really cool to see. It's really cool to see.
I think also when we are coming back to Kano in the context of the next set, you were talking about these decks that Kano have struggles to play against, and we don't know yet if he will be struggling into the
Yeah.
high seas decks that we will see. But when you think about the decks that Kano is struggling into, like maybe you can walk us through what he is really struggling with and what you can do about it as a Kano player.
Yeah, right now, he primarily struggles against like Illusionist, like Enigma and Prism are like pretty bad matchups for him these days. The Enigma matchup actually was probably one of the most fun, like slightly favored, like 51-49 matchups of like all time, of like Kano being really good with like the old tomes, and it was really, really fun. It was really hard to play that matchup from both sides, and it was always like a barn burner, right? Like it was always really cool to see. an Enigma versus Kano game. But now without like the prevalence of like Tome of Aetherwind and Tome of Fyendal, the matchup has gotten a lot worse, and I would actually think it's like decently like decently pretty bad for Kano. It's probably around like 40%, but Prism is like horrendous. Like that matchup is like you don't have the block value to stop their on hits. Like they hit you with like Heralds for 7, and you're just like, well, I have a Tunic to block within like 3 blocks of my hand, and like some of them are like 2 blocks, and I play a lot like 6. I play like 11 no blocks in my deck, right? Like I'm not really blocking super efficiently. And like the second that Prism hits, they like get an Angel that also has Ward 4, which prevents all my damage. And it's just like and then has, you know, a helmet that has Spell Void 2 naturally on the helmet, but like they use it for the other ability in every other matchup. But it just has Spell Void 2 against Kano. So it's just like all these things compile for the Illusionist matchups for Kano. And Illusionist kind of hits Kano right where he doesn't want. Can't really interact with it, right? So, the Illusionists line up into him very, very well, in that regard. But you can kind of play like Nourishing Emptiness is one of those cards that is like a popper, but like it's also pretty good to buy space for you. Your opponent maybe overblocks it a little bit, but playing the the 1 for 4 and like Waiting Moon is also like a strategy that a lot of people bring. But every class needs to have a bad matchup, and that unfortunately is Kano's bad matchup. But a lot of time he doesn't really struggle with a lot of the other stuff. Maybe like Arsenal hate from like Assassin, and then obviously Assassin has they've printed a lot of Assassin cards recently, and one of them obviously is the Spellboy 1 AB1 equipment, which is really, really a nuisance for Wizard. But besides that, no, he just has a lot of fun just running around with some spells.
I think also there are some specific cards in Kano that are not been mentioned that often, and that are like kind of like neutral on the surface, but they are mostly coming from the expansion slot, where a lot of Wizards cards for Kano are coming from these days. And I'm talking specifically about like a Destructive Aethertide, and also that one card Ether Arc from Heavy Hitters, which can demand a little bit of a price. They are not too pricey, but what do you think about these cards specifically? Because when looking at any other deck besides Kano, you are looking at like staples to play like Command and Conquer and Enlightened Strike, for example, which are not really needed in Kano, but Destructive Aethertide gives you the ability to really punish the arsenal as well. But is it really an effect that comes up, or is it just that you're looking at the blue for 3 block?
It comes up sometimes. It's like the blues having additional effects in Kano are obviously very good. But honestly, like the Shuffle Aethertide is like way more of a Verdance card than anything. Like she gets to play the amp tree and give +3, but then get to play this destroy arsenal like effect on like a spell that when it's usually just like a blockable effect. And I think that stuff is like pretty cool to see. That like obviously I wish I could also play it red, that which would be very good, because coming in for like a blueser for 1 or like in just like 2 damage with like just the staff is like not the most efficient thing a lot of the time. But when you hit it off Wildfire, like I've definitely won games with like people like it hitting, and it's like the middle spell it like destroys their arsenal, and like I would probably lose off of a 5-card hand on the next turn, but now they don't have a 5-card hand, they only have a 4-card hand and stuff like that. But yeah, there's not all like he has a lot of cards that kind of do the same thing as these really expensive cards, but they just they're pretty cheap. Yeah, the deck is like the deck has always been relatively cheap, and I think it will continue to be so. Just how the class kind of goes.
Yeah. Then looking at the cost of Flesh and Blood, what do you think about it in general? Like the staple prices that we have at the moment, and what would you like, this trend to go?
Yeah, I've never really had a problem with like the price of the game. Coming from like the bigger games like Magic as well. Um, like I know Yu-Gi-Oh like kind of has like some of those problems where like cards can be like super super expensive and then they kind of like print them into the ground. And I never been like somebody that like wanted to be like, oh, just reprint everything so it's always cheap. Like boxes need like there needs to be value in the boxes, right? Like there needs to be a reason to open these boxes, uh, like to get all these like high rarity cards that are expensive, right? So, I think Command and Conquer getting printed as a legendary is like brings the price down like $20 as it's done, and allows more chance to get these cards in there. But do I think Command and Conquer needs to be a $20 card? No, not at all. Like that card needs to be that card's a three of in like 90% of decks in the game, right? Like it needs to be that price tag is deserved. I think the prices of the game are pretty deserved at this point. And we've gotten a lot of the short printings like out of the way. Uh, and yeah, I think the pricing of the game is pretty fair. Like obviously it's on like the higher side of like a lot of the other games. It can never be like maybe a Pokemon or something like that. Like that is just like $40. Everything is $40. But if you want to, if you have all the staples, like if you have all the generics and everything like that, like I basically spend like maybe $100 to build a deck that I don't own currently. So after having all the generic stuff and the class stuff, so uh, the initial investment is high. I'll agree with that, but I think the price is probably where it needs to be at this point, especially with the big boom of TCGs right now. So yeah.
Also, you are mentioning a very important part of the price here, and that is like, yeah, the longevity of the cards that you have in Flesh and Blood. And you experienced that very well. We talked about it a lot in this podcast. You were playing like for 5 years or more, and basically you not are playing all of the same cards as 5 years ago, but there are still some cards like Command and Conquer and Light and Strike that you still play, and these are holding value. So that is something that you can really enjoy over the time. And when you then factor that price in over the course of those 5 years, suddenly the cost is looking very much differently compared to, for example, a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, where you basically have to switch up all the meta cards like maybe 6 months or 12 months from now.
Yeah, I still remember opening, my three Command and Conquer. Like I was opening Arc like way beginning, and because I couldn't find singles online basically because there was just like not a lot of people played back then, and like trying to find cards was hard. So I some people like got boxes around me, and I was opening boxes, and I opened three Command and Conquers luckily in a couple cases, and been literally have had the same three Command and Conquers for 5 years. And like if I think about like the value of like yeah, they were like $120 at one point, but like I've also played Command and Conquer like in of like 12 different decks through 5 years, like multiple times a week, like basically if I paid like $1 per time I played with the card, like it'd be like $1,000 card at this point. So the value that I've gotten from getting those cards are like is very high, but it's hard to see that how much you're going to use something. Uh, and also like I still have the value. Like at any time, like, if I like needed to sell my Command and Cookers, like I can get 80% for them pretty much all day. So yeah, I use the same Art of Wars and E-Strikes and Command and Cookers. Like I still have, my WTR, all my WTR cards and all my ARC cards and Crucible cards are from like when I started playing the game when Crucible came out, basically. So, yeah, I think the value of playing the game for a long time, is something people overlook. Obviously, initial investment super hard, right? Like it's what it is, but um, yeah, that I made the initial investment all ago. So yeah.
Yeah. And then when we are looking at the core of Kano, which we talked about, is like cheaper than other ones. What would be other decks that you would say are viable options in the current meta when people are starting out besides Kano?
Uh, I say like the Mechanologists. Obviously like Dash IE is like at the last moment. It's at like 940, I believe, of LL, but like that deck just like does not like get LL points, so it's like it's going to like crawl through the finish line basically at one point, like at the very end. Like it's no win, like it's no randomly win a battle hardened one day and everybody's gonna be like, no way it won, and then like it LLs, right? Like it's just gonna be some random stuff, but like Mechanologist specifically, I think definitely has a chance of getting another set and like revamping the class and like really bring it in. Especially after the high octane ban. Like I know that there's probably going to be expansion slot cards in the future that you can invest in that like will make these mechanologists better than what they are currently. Um, Dash.io is actually one of like my favorite decks to watch and like play directly. So and I think it's still good like in a lot of times. Dash.io definitely is a very cheap deck that I think a lot of people can learn, play the game, play the aggro archetype in, and then branch out further. Mechanologist usually is like around $200-300 as well. Like that's another cheap class. Ranger usually is a pretty cheap class as well. That you can learn the game and get into it, and then go into more stuff in the future. So, that's what I would look at as well.
Perfect. I think like for me, those are like all of the topics that I wanted to talk about with you. Maybe you have something that you want to bring up here at the end before we close down the podcast?
Yeah. Are you going to be at Pro Tour London?
Oh no, sadly I will not be there.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
I would have loved to come, and
Yeah.
I assume you will be there then
I
when you're
will.
asking.
I
Yeah.
will. I will be at Pro Tour London. Thinking about going to the calling in Sao Paulo in South America as well. It's
Ooh.
like actually I found out it's like actually not that very like expensive to go from like I live in like the Southwest US, so it is not actually that far to go to Brazil or like the price wise. So I was thinking about going there as well, but no, definitely uh playing the game, traveling the world is very fun. So unfortunately, won't see you at London, but I hope to see
Yeah.
everybody there.
Yeah, I hope to see you at a future event as well. But I have to say, my big event this year was so far the world premiere for The Hunted in Prague. I was
Ooh,
there.
yeah,
And so that was a big experience for me in this year. But I'm very eager to watch like the Pro Tour London, because I know so many of my friends all around the world will be there and will be playing as well. So I'm very curious to see how it will go down. And I also think like 2025 is just such an amazing spot to be in as a Flesh and Blood player, because there's also so much competition going on in the TCG sphere just in general. We have, for example, the One Piece World Championship, the second one in this year. We have the first Lorcana World Championship. And we also have like Star Wars Unlimited getting their like continental tournament series going. So I just think being a competitive player all around is such an amazing place to be in this year.
yeah. The definitely the we're eating good as a TCG player at this point. Like there's so many options right now, but I always enjoyed Flesh and Blood moving forward. So hope it goes well for the next couple of years, and we'll see where it is then.
Yeah, definitely. I think the future is definitely bright for Flesh and Blood. Also with the like recognition and the growth we have seen along like the last year, and also with like this amazing pirate set just on the horizon.
Yeah, it's big. I more people have joined my local like Flesh and Blood Discord than ever before. Like we've doubled in basically size in the last like 6 months, and just like more stores like reaching out, being like, hey, like, um, we ordered this product. Like, does anybody play here? And it's just like trying to find new local communities for it and teaching new players. Like, I think I've taught like 100 new people in the last couple of years to play how to play the game. So it's been great, and I hope it keeps succeeding.
That's crazy, man. I love to see it.
Yeah.
And here at the end, do you want to shout out anyone?
Yeah, shout out my testing team super awful as well. Shout out Alex Four and Majin Bay and other members of like the Wizard Council that just put an incredible amount of time into playing and testing Wizards and testing every other format. Like I obviously would never be able to be here unless it was for a lot of my testing partners throughout that put a tremendous amount of work into testing decks that we've played at multiple pro tours and events. So basically, shout out to that around the way.
And I have to say, thank you so much for taking the time, Peter. It was really like a fire ride here, talking about Kano and Flesh and Blood in general with you.
Yeah, thank you, Arab.